Hey everybody, Mike Macniak here. Happy Friday to you all, and thank you for being part of this amazing forum, this amazing group. And we're just growing in leaps and bounds. So please, please, please invite your friends, invite other fiduciaries, caregivers, social workers, people who are involved in our space. Last week I posted a blurb. Actually, it's taken from an article that I'm planning to publish here in a little bit. But the idea is that I want to make sure that fiduciaries don't make certain assumptions about their clients or their clientele. And some of this is going to sound really stupid and silly, but a lot of it is really deep hitting home stuff that I've found really resonates with family members or the fiduciary who is new or the fiduciaries who's seeing something that they've never seen before. And what I mean by that is I wrote this article, and it's entitled 5 Misconceptions of the Fiduciary. So I'm going to basically make these posts over the next several weeks, and I'm going to try to turn off my cell phone so it stops ringing, of course, because that would be a good thing. I'm going to try to sort of expand upon what I'm saying in these posts. So that's what I'm here to do. That's what I'm doing here right now. And I'm doing the best I can to hold this camera steady. It looks like it wants to topple over, but I hope it's going to be okay. Anyway, so the first thing that I wrote about is this concept that the fiduciary should not make the assumption that mental illness can or should be treated like any other illness. And in the blurb, I somewhat tongue-in-cheek said, we can't go to a doctor and expect that we're going to get a pill like like I have chronic ear infections, right? I can go to the doctor and I can get antibiotic and maybe some anti-inflammatory to help me with my ear infections. We break an arm, we can get a cast, we can go to rehab. But, and I know this sounds silly to have to say, but mental illness does not work that way. And I think for a lot of folks, that message is lost. And I guess most of you who are watching this right now probably already realize, wow, Mike, how stupid. Of course, mental illness can't be fixed with a pill or a shot or a shot of penicillin and it'll go away. But the reality of it is, folks, is that this is the work that we do every day. This is what we're used to doing. And we see folks with all kinds of developmental disabilities, cognitive deficits, mental illnesses, cognitive impairments that are organic or otherwise. And the reality of it is that our exposure to those folks is not the norm. Most of society puts their head in the sand and does not typically confront, run into, socialize, or associate with folks who are in need because of mental impairments, mental incapacity, and cognitive impairments. So as much as we may take it for granted that you just don't cure mental illness overnight, a lot of folks don't realize that, and it really is lost upon a lot of folks. So I want to make sure that you realize that and you remember that when you're doing your work, as a fiduciary or as a guardian, you remember that not everybody has your experience. I met a family who, very wealthy family from the southern part of Connecticut, and they had their very first run-in with mental illness in their family when their child was, I'm going to tell you, in his late 20s. They were very high, very educated, very sophisticated, smart people. They just had never experienced it, and they had never had to learn about it. They had never had to dive into the world of services and hospitalizations and psychiatry and psychotropic medications. So the lesson there is, as we all know, mental health issues, mental illnesses do not discriminate. It doesn't matter if you're black, white, or purple. It doesn't matter if you're rich, poor, or I don't know what the difference would be, but it doesn't matter your socioeconomic status. It doesn't matter your color, your gender, your sexual preference. Mental illness can attack anybody that we know. In fact, 1 in 5 people, it's estimated, have some form of mental illness, according to studies that are out there from the federal government, et cetera. So chances are that you know somebody close to you who has some form of mental illness. But I wrote down a couple notes here for myself just to make sure that I mentioned. One thing I think that fiduciaries have a real tough time doing, and it's not because of the fiduciary. I think that fiduciaries have a real tough time explaining to family members what's going on with the loved one who is all of a sudden manifesting traits of some form of mental incapacity, be it, again, dementia, mental illness, whatever the case may be. Because we have to remember, we have to be cognizant of the fact that when a child, let's say, is starting to exhibit the onset of mental illness, let's use schizophrenia. Schizophrenia typically hits folks when they turn about 18 to 25 is really the time where schizophrenia tends to start to show itself in most people. There's absolutely exceptions to the rule, but that is very typically the time. So what we need to do is we need to understand that when families are confronted with this for the first time, and they're told, or they are trying to make peace with the fact that, oh my goodness, my child who I've had for 17, 18, 19 years is all of a sudden struggling with this illness, or trying to or manifesting the behaviors of the illness. We have to understand that they are going through a change and a loss of that loved one or that child or whomever. So not only is the person who's afflicted with the illness changing and being impacted, but the family who is surrounding them is also going through the change. And this creates, in no uncertain terms, the stages of loss and the stages of grief that a family and a person will go through as they understand that, wow, this family member, this loved one, this child of mine is changing in a way that is profound. And frankly, it's a loss of the person that they used to know. So when you are a fiduciary and you are acting in the capacity of trying to care for somebody who has mental illness, and you invariably come in contact with their family members, you really have to take it from that perspective and remember that they are going through and experiencing a loss, or trying to struggle and grapple with something that they may not have any experience with. And this may be frustrating to some of us acting in this capacity, but it's very important to remember and keep that in your heart and in your head, that you need to treat it with kid gloves and walk people through that process and help them in any way you possibly can to explain the illness, explain everything that you know about it, everything that you can learn about it, give them resources so that they can learn, and refer them to appropriate places so that they can get support. So that's the one thing I wanted to say. The other thing that's important to remember when you are acting as a fiduciary and you are dealing with folks with mental incapacities is that you really have to be on top of their medical and service providers in order to get accurate reports. I know that it goes without saying, and this is not a blanket statement, but very often folks who are experiencing any kind of cognitive deficit don't necessarily hear things clearly and cannot necessarily sort of regurgitate or repeat what they've heard. So it is really incumbent upon us to make sure that we've got all the facts straight. Now, I'm not saying to hold people's hands and you have to go into the doctor's offices with them, but it really behooves you to get a real clear understanding of the process that they're going through, the treatment plan that they're under, the medical diagnoses, and whatever course of conduct or course of action is prescribed by the professionals. When folks go to a physician or they go to a clinician, it was really important that you get a good report so that you are well informed about what's going on, because you cannot always rely on your client or their family or their friend to tell you specifically all the things that you really need to know as a fiduciary. And we talked about the family, and we talked about that relationship. One thing that I would caution all of you on with regard to folks with cognitive deficits, and especially folks with severe and persistent mental illnesses, is the tendency for splitting. And it does not necessarily have to be your client. Sometimes family members tend to split a team. They don't want a course of action to be taken this way. They want to go this way. Or the client themselves may want things their way as opposed to the way that the team wants it. And very often they're pitting one side against another. And it's important that the fiduciary maintain their relationship with their client, but also maintain that best interest standard and least restrictive standard that we all have to adhere to. If you have questions about best interest or least restrictive, especially least restrictive, just message me here. The least restrictive concept goes into a whole bunch of different areas, and I would be happy to have a discussion with you guys about that privately or in this forum or whatever forum we decide to do that in. And lastly, remember that most of these cognitive issues, dementia, Alzheimer's, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, are cyclical in nature, but they are also chronic. So the disease or the illness will go through various cycles. It will have its ups and its downs, but it's going to continue in a loop, and it's going to continue to go through. Some loops can be years and years and years. Some loops can be very quick. And just remembering that these things will follow a pattern can be very helpful in your understanding and your preparedness for acute moments of crisis or predicting decompensation. We had a client once who for 10 years straight decompensated in November. And it took one of my staff persons, actually, I think it was my clinical director, my partner Sarah here at the nonprofit, who said, let me look at the medical records and see what's going on. And sure enough, she found the pattern that every year in November, this woman was decompensating. And we scratched a little further and said, oh my goodness, it's the anniversary of her mother's death. So every year in November, this woman had something going on where she just was really she was very unsettled about the anniversary of her mother's death, and she was basically not having a good time of it. And this went on for years and years and years, and nobody put two and two together that, number one, this was happening year after year, and number two, that there was a reason for it. So what that allowed us to do then is to say, in September and October, let's get the team together, let's prepare for what may be coming up in November, that we expect will be coming up in November, so that we could be there and be the best resource and catch this mutual client of ours at any time that we possibly can. So anyway, so mental illness cannot be cured like a broken arm or an ear infection. You can't just go to the doctor's office, as I said, and get a shot of penicillin and hope and it'll go away. And as a fiduciary, your understanding of that and some of the concepts that I just touched on will be really, really helpful for you. And maybe more important, it'll be very helpful for your client. And it will be very helpful for their family and all of their extrinsic supports that are out there taking good care of them or trying to be of support to them. So anyway, so that hopefully will be enough for you to chew on for a little while. Please comment below. Please keep the dialogue going. We're really doing great at building this community. I want to keep this momentum running. I'm going to continue to post things like this, and then I'll follow up with sort of my interpretation. If you saw yesterday, I posted again, and the topic that I posted for you all yesterday was the idea of confidentiality. This is a big, big, hairy spider that a lot of people are freaked out about, and somewhat unnecessarily so. So within the next couple of days, I'll get back on like this and do an explanation of what I meant in that that post. So until then, everybody, stay proactive, stay proficient, and you'll keep changing lives. And I'll see you in the group and online. So got to land my video now. All right, take care, everyone. Have a great weekend.